February 1815, and on a small island just off the coast of Italy, Napoleon is staring longingly at the continent he once ruled in the distance. Just a year ago, he'd controlled more of Europe than any man since the height of the Roman Empire. As the Emperor of France, he'd conquered nearly the entire continent. But now, his empire was reduced to two tiny Mediterranean islands, his subjects little more than goats and fishermen. It had taken the combined forces of literally every European nation and a major assist from Mother Nature before Napoleon was finally defeated in the War of the Sixth Coalition. To prevent him from becoming a martyr, the great powers chose to exile Napoleon to the tiny island of Elba to live out the rest of his days. He'd be cut off from his people, and he would be given the ultimate punishment for a man of such ambition. He would be forced to helplessly watch as Europe moved on without him. Upon arriving on Elba, Napoleon had initially resigned himself to his fate and simply planned to improve the island and make it his new home. But soon, he begins to receive letters from supporters that make it sound like Europe's having a lot more trouble moving on than they expected. The great powers of the coalition who defeated him have gathered at the Congress of Vienna and are trying to put Europe back together. But without their common enemy, they've begun to turn on each other and squabble over who gets what after beating Napoleon. Meanwhile, back in France, the coalition had placed a new king, Louis XVIII, on the throne. But he quickly becomes unpopular by reminding everyone why they got rid of their king in the first place. He's out of touch, and the soldiers who are now not being paid begin to look back fondly on the days when Napoleon ruled. Letters pour into Elba, telling Napoleon that if he were to return, the people of France would welcome him with open arms. So, as he watches the sun set, Napoleon quietly decides to once again change the course of history. He orders the repair of his ship, the Inconstant, and in the dark of night on Sunday, February 26, 1815, Napoleon and 1,000 of his most loyal soldiers leave Elba and set sail for the European coast. The Corsican monster, the nightmare that had terrorized Europe for nearly 2 decades, is en route back to France. On March 7th, Metternich, the acting head of the Congress of Vienna, is awakened in the middle of the night with an urgent message from Elba. Upon hearing the report, a chill runs down his spine. Napoleon is missing. Within the hour, he gathers the leaders of Europe together and shares the news, and the Congress of Vienna immediately falls into chaos. Everyone begins to panic and point fingers at each other. The English are blamed for letting him escape, the French for not providing Napoleon's promised allowance, the Russians are considered as potential turncoats. But in the end, it does not matter. The greatest threat to Europe has returned, and all they can do is prepare for war. On March 1st, Napoleon sets foot onto French soil for the first time in 300 days and begins his march to Paris. The king orders the 5th Regiment to find Napoleon and stop him, using lethal force if necessary. They meet just outside of the town of Grenoble, and the 5th stands in formation on the road blocking the emperor's path. Napoleon's guard ready their weapons, and the two armies size each other up. The king's soldiers stare down the barrels of their guns, locked on the man who had ruled them all less than a year ago. Napoleon steps forward, holds out his arms and shouts, "Here I am! Kill your emperor, if you wish!" Nobody moves, and the silence is deafening. The men on both sides stand nervously with their weapons at the ready. Finally, after what seems like an eternity, a member of the 5th Regiment lowers his rifle. One by one, the French soldiers follow his lead. Someone in formation shouts out, "Long live the Emperor!" And this call is quickly answered with a resounding reply from every soldier on both sides of the standoff. "Long live the Emperor!" They all shout in unison. The 5th Regiment throws down their weapons and rush to Napoleon with arms raised victoriously in the air. They shake hands with Napoleon's guard, and together they all celebrate his long-awaited return. Napoleon's now larger rebel army continued its march to Paris. Over the next 20 days, 12,000 more soldiers would be sent out by King Louis to capture Napoleon, and they would all immediately defect to join him. As the news spreads throughout Europe, the Congress of Vienna realizes they must put aside their differences and again work together if an independent Europe is to survive. On Monday, March 13th, Napoleon is declared an outlaw by the nations of Austria, Great Britain, Prussia, and Russia. With more and more of the French army defecting to the former emperor, King Louis runs away to Belgium, and on March 20th, just 20 days after his arrival, Napoleon marches into Paris unopposed. The city erupts into celebration. He retakes the throne without firing a single bullet. The emperor has returned. Oh my God! The Emperor has returned! On March 25th, the Congress of Vienna ratified the Treaty of Alliance against Napoleon. Each of the four great powers promised 150,000 men for the fight. No more half measures. Napoleon must be defeated decisively once and for all, and they begin to draw up plans for a July 1st invasion of France. 2 European armies are quickly assembled in Belgium near the French border to defend against a possible invasion. A British army is led by Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, who commands a ragtag group of 92,000 Dutch, English, and German troops, and a Prussian army that's led by Marshal von Blücher with around 121,000 Prussian soldiers. Both commanders are hardened veterans of the Napoleonic Wars. They know their enemy, and they're trusted with the unenviable task of holding off the emperor as long as possible to give the rest of the coalition time to rally their armies. Back in France, Napoleon's quickly put together a new French army of 124,000 troops. He hears of the planned Allied invasion and of the 2 armies already stationed in Belgium. He realizes he must quickly make a choice. He can continue to rebuild his army and defend against the coming invasion, or he can go on the offense and knock out the English and Prussian armies now. If he destroys both armies, there's a chance he can force the coalition into a peace treaty where he remains the ruler of France. And so he chooses to go on the offense and strike now. Napoleon knows a combined British and Prussian army would outnumber his men 2-1, but he has a plan. The 2 Allied armies are still separated. If he moves quickly, he can drive his army in between them, cut them off from each other, and take them out one at a time. But this plan means he must move immediately. If he delays any further, Wellington and Blücher will coordinate and fortify their positions together. So Napoleon takes his army and boldly crosses the border into Belgium on June 15th. And then I said, well, the drugstore ran out of you! Wait, shh. I thought I heard something. Oh no! It's Napoleon! And they have ray guns!
Hit the scene and it's all green. On go, we ain't never doing small things. Being fitted for the crown, cause we all kings. If you know you got the shine, let them people know it's time for the show. Hit the scene and it's all green. On go, we ain't never doing small things. Being fitted for the crown, cause we all kings. If you know you got the shine, let them people know it's time for the show.
With a 32-hour battery life and a quick charge function that gives you 90 minutes of power in just 10 minutes, Raycon's latest model is better than ever. Oh, why didn't you warn us? Sorry about that. Anyways, with Father's Day coming up, the everyday earbuds would make the perfect gift for Dad. You'll get premium quality sound at half the price of the other guys. I love mine and use them when I'm going to the gym, going on walks, or when I'm in any other noisy place where I need to block out background noise to lock in. Right now, Serious History fans can click the link in the description below or go to buyraycon.com/serioushistory to get 15% off site-wide on all Raycon products. Thanks, Raycon, for helping us make this video! Now watch us steamroll these guys! The Prussians are the first to encounter Napoleon's men and are shocked at his speed of movement. They try to hold them back, but they are unprepared and ultimately fail. The British are warned, and the Duke of Wellington and Blücher quickly begin their preparations for their inevitable date with the Demon of France. They both know from experience that Napoleon will not give them time to prepare. Within 24 hours, they'll be forced once again into battle against the greatest general of their lifetime. The next day, Napoleon makes his move. He divides his men and places half his army under the command of the man he had called the bravest of the brave, Field Marshal Michel Ney, and gives him orders to capture the British-held town of Quatre. At the same time, he personally takes the remainder of his men and marches toward the small village of Ligny to engage the Prussians. With lightning speed, Napoleon moves his men into position and waits. At 2:30 p.m., he finally hears cannon fire coming from Quatre. Ney has begun his assault, so in turn, he gives the command to attack. French cannons open fire on the Prussians, and his troops rush into battle. Fighting engulfs the streets of Ligny. Homes and buildings are quickly stormed and used as defensive positions. The townspeople trapped in the crossfire can do nothing but cover their eyes and ears and hold their children close as carnage erupts all around them. The Prussians fight bitterly, but Napoleon's army is like an unstoppable force of nature. By the end of the day, 16,000 Prussian soldiers are dead, and those still alive are forced to retreat. Blücher is nearly killed in the battle after his horse is shot out from under him, but he somehow survives. And can I just stop here for just a second and point out that Blücher was 72 years old at this battle? He's literally a grandpa out there leading cavalry charges against the world's greatest general. What a Chad! Anyway, Blücher's generals push for a full retreat, but he refuses. He must remain close to help the Duke of Wellington when the time comes. This he had promised. So instead, he regroups his army to the north just 18 miles away. He'll risk the lives of all of his men to keep his word. At Quatre, Ney has less luck against the British. He had hesitated, and this delay had allowed his enemy time to fully fortify their positions. He has more men, but they're now running straight into heavy defensive fire, and wave after wave of his soldiers die trying to take the town. As the sun sets, the Duke of Wellington's forces have successfully stopped Ney's advance. In the cover of night, the British safely retreat to Waterloo, while a disgruntled Marshal Ney slinks back to Napoleon. Now, Ney had failed to crush the British forces at Quatre, but he did manage to keep them separated from the Prussians. Phase 1 of Napoleon's plan had still worked, and they can now use the full power of the French army to crush each of their enemies one at a time. But Napoleon receives a report that some of the Prussians are still nearby. If they reach the British and combine their forces, the battle will become much more difficult. He cannot allow this to happen. So he draws up plans to attack Wellington immediately. He will crush the British army before Blücher and the Prussians have any hope of saving them. The fate of Europe will come down to a race against time. And this final decisive battle will happen on Sunday, June 18, 1815, at a place called Waterloo. Following Quatre, the Duke of Wellington and his men scramble to fortify defensive positions near a ridge in an area just south of a tiny village called Waterloo. His army is a ragtag group of inexperienced Germans, Dutch, and Belgian soldiers who have joined his elite British troops. In response to the news of Napoleon's return, they were assembled at the last minute by the coalition. It was the best they could do with such limited time, and this army of green recruits is all Wellington has to work with to try to stop the world's greatest general and his army of seasoned veterans. They turned 3 farmhouses into makeshift forts. Hougoumont to the right, La Haye Sainte to the center, and Papillote to the left. Each one is filled with elite British troops. Blücher sends word to Wellington that they're coming to join him in battle, but they are still hours away. The British will be on their own until their arrival, but if they can hold on, they can win. After Ligny, Napoleon assumes the main Prussian force has been neutralized, buying him more than enough time to finish off Wellington and his men. But just as a precaution, he sends out a third of his army to find the remaining Prussian units and wipe them out before they can join up with Wellington. The night of June 17th is an uneasy one for everyone. As if mourning the death and destruction to come, the skies open up and a thunderstorm soaks the ground overnight. The sky is clear by morning, but much of the land between Napoleon's position and the British fortifications has been turned into a thick sea of mud. Napoleon, who wanted to attack at 9 a.m., now waits hours for the sun to dry the ground before he begins his advance towards the British position. No matter, he's still confident that the Prussians are broken and his men will wipe the inexperienced British out in no time. Upon their arrival at the battlefield, the French soldiers disperse into their proper formations, and finally, at 11 a.m., Napoleon gives the signal. His men launch their first attack to the right on Hougoumont. Cannon fire breaks the silence of the midday as French troops storm the farmhouse. The plan is to force Wellington's hand and make him take troops from his center formation to reinforce his right. But the Allied troops at Hougoumont fight back with everything they got, and Napoleon's men begin to take heavy losses as they approach the farmhouse. Wellington calmly observes from a distance, and he does not commit any further reinforcements from his center. Napoleon's first move has been countered, so he answers with increased violence. At noon, Napoleon sends a volley of cannon fire at the English center and sends his troops to take La Haye Sainte. The Allied forces grip their bayonets and watch as the French column of death slowly marches towards them, their steps shaking the ground as they scream, "Vive l'Empereur! Long live the Emperor!" Napoleon's forces charge the position and the fighting quickly devolves into violence at a horrific scale. Bayonets and fists become the weapons of last resort as the defenders close ranks. The British are pushed back further and further until Wellington finally counterpunches by sending his elite cavalry into the fray. They smash into the French infantry and they begin to scatter. Filled with confidence, the horse riders follow in hot pursuit, easily cutting down French soldiers as they retreat. But in their excitement, the British cavalry overextend themselves and ride into range of Napoleon's cannons. A brutal cannon barrage rips horses and riders apart. Napoleon signals for his elite lancers to charge, and they make quick work of the now stranded British cavalry. Without the cavalry support, the English infantry are now undefended on their flanks, and they're slowly succumbing to Napoleon's forces. The Emperor smiles grimly, sensing that victory is near. He's contemplating his next attack when out of the corner of his eye he spots something in the distance. He grabs his spyglass to investigate and cannot believe what he sees. The army he had sent out to slow the Prussians has failed, and they're now charging towards the battlefield. He's now on the clock, and he must wipe out the British before the Prussians arrive. Napoleon lowers the spyglass and clutches his stomach in pain. He'd been suffering throughout the battle with some sort of infection, and the pain had increased to an intolerable level despite the laudanum he'd been taking. He decides to take a break and rest up for the final confrontation and places his trusted marshal, Michel Ney, in charge while he lies down. Upon assuming command, Ney sees what he believes to be weakened British infantry formations pulling back over the ridge. They're running! He can crush them now if he acts quickly. So, without consulting Napoleon, he personally leads a massive cavalry charge up the hill towards the retreating British infantry on the ridge. Wellington sees 9,000 elite French cavalry storming directly towards his position and is forced to think fast. He turns and orders the infantry on the ridge to form up into hollow square formations, with every man pointing his weapon outward. The British soldiers frantically race into position as the thunderous roar of the stampeding French cavalry grows louder and louder. The ground beneath the British begins to shake as Ney's cavalry finally crest the hill, and upon sight, the Allied formations open fire. The French riders try to smash into the British formations, but their horses defy the orders and refuse to charge into the hedge of bayonet blades. They instead race around the squares like water flowing around rocks in a stream. The French soldiers are picked apart by the British, who are now firing at them from every direction. Ney continues to send waves of cavalry over the hill, and every wave of cavalry meets the same gruesome fate. Eventually, the French riders are forced to pull back, having won nothing and suffering massive casualties. The Prussians continue racing towards the battlefield, and Napoleon now realizes he has just an hour or two at most before all hope of victory is lost. He urges his men to fight on, but the unfamiliar feeling of desperation begins to crack his invincible will. Finally, the French take the farmhouse of Les Saintes, and Napoleon quickly pushes his cannons forward. From this position, he fires on the British at close range, punching a hole right through the Allied center. Though Wellington's army had exceeded all expectations, Napoleon was still Napoleon. He's the greatest general of their time, and the Allied defense is now on the brink of collapse. As his men continue to fall, Wellington looks west to the setting sun. If he can just hold out a little longer, they may be saved by nightfall. But suddenly, he hears soldiers to his left erupt into cheers. His head snaps in their direction, and he sees Blücher has made good on his word. Though they're late, the Prussians have arrived at Waterloo. Blücher's army smashes into Napoleon's eastern flank, and the French emperor is forced to divert troops to defend his position. Now surrounded on three sides, he's fighting purely for survival. And it's at this point Napoleon plays his final move, his trump card that he's kept close to the vest only to be used in the direst of circumstances. He gives the order for his Imperial Guard to attack. Made up of entirely elite veterans, this unit was the crown jewel of Napoleon's army. Just their name alone would strike fear into the hearts of the enemies of France, and they were now marching directly towards the British position. The Allied troops fire into the Imperial Guard, trying to stop them, but undaunted, they continue their march up the hill towards Wellington's men. Ready for the bloody fight to come, the first of Napoleon's elite soldiers crest the hill, but they're surprised to find not one British soldier there. It's eerily quiet, and as the rest of the guard join them on the hill, they are equally confused. As they survey the land, searching for the enemy, a cry breaks the silence. "Now, Maitland! Now's your time!" Wellington shouts. On command, Sir Peregrine Maitland and his 1,500 troops, who had hidden themselves in the tall grass, stand and begin opening fire on the startled French soldiers. The British had positioned themselves in a long, thin line to ensure every soldier had a clear shot. And at this close of a range, they didn't miss. It's a literal firing squad, and the Imperial Guard is ripped apart. The remains of the shocked guard attempt to fight back, but they're quickly met by a bayonet charge, and it's at this moment that the most legendary unit of Napoleon's Grand Army does something they had never done before. They turn and begin to run. The sight of the Imperial Guard running for their lives breaks the will of Napoleon's men. If the best troops think this battle is lost, it most certainly is. Panic sweeps through the entire French army, and they all begin to flee. Wellington orders a counterattack, and British, Belgian, German, and Dutch troops stream down the hill towards Napoleon's position. The Prussians push in from the east, and Napoleon realizes the day is lost. He retreats. At 9 p.m., Wellington and Blücher embrace on the battlefield, having pulled off the impossible. Together, they've vanquished the nightmare that has plagued Europe for nearly 2 decades. Napoleon returns to Paris, hoping to raise another army, but the loss at Waterloo had turned his people against him. His second reign as Emperor of France is done. It had lasted just 100 days. He's forced to abdicate the throne for a second time and is once again exiled, this time to the remote island of St. Helena. Here, on a tiny island off the coast of Africa, Napoleon lives out the rest of his life, fiercely guarded to ensure he will never escape to terrorize Europe again. Thanks to the heroics of the Duke of Wellington and Blücher, Europe enjoys a relative peace that lasts for nearly 100 years. This peace brings about the Industrial Revolution, and technological breakthroughs would transform the world into one that's completely unrecognizable to Napoleon and his opponents at Waterloo. Thanks to its rich deposits of iron and coal, Prussia would quickly become one of the most powerful nations in Europe and eventually evolve into the mighty German Empire. And at the dawn of the 20th century, this empire would field the most terrifying army the world had ever seen. It would soon be their turn to fight against a coalition of nations in a war so catastrophic, it would eventually engulf the entire world.